Oh yeah, I've really been looking forward to this one, guys. I had the opportunity a couple days ago to go and see the premiere of Detective Pikachu, the most likely first of many live-action Pokemon adaptations to come to the big screen. A movie which, at its core, attempted to make a Pokemon movie, a live-action Pokemon movie, appeal to a general audience. Like, seriously, they even got Ryan Reynolds to come in and voice this movie's talking Pikachu, Detective Pikachu, and do the whole funny Deadpool shtick without all the cussing and killing. They want this to appeal to as many people, to as broad an audience as possible. So I am quite obviously exactly the person who should be reviewing this movie. That said, I am going to be essentially reviewing this twice. I'm going to talk about it as a general film first, and then as a Pokemon film second. And as a general film, I actually think it works pretty well. Like, I'm biased, clearly, but I think it works out pretty well. The humor in this movie lands almost 100% of the time, and yes, some jokes were obviously meta jokes meant to call back to the Pokemon franchise and appeal to people with knowledge of it. But that said, there's still tons of humor in this that doesn't rely on that. Even some of the jokes which do rely on that to be as deep as they intend to be are still funny entirely on the merit that they're delivered by Ryan Reynolds and the timing's good, and therefore they work as just kind of random humor. Not only that, but the monster designs in this are super creative and interesting. Like, everybody recognizes Pokemon. Even people who aren't into Pokemon recognize Pokemon. And the creatures in this movie were recognizable as Pokemon. You're going to recognize Pikachu and Charizard, at the very least, just from watching the trailer, even if you're not a diehard fan. And yet, there's still something about them. They don't look quite real, and that's not to say they aren't well integrated into the world, because they definitely are. They are super well integrated into the environments of this movie, but there's still something surreal about them. They seem on that borderline between cute and monstrous. And I adore that, because they should. Pokemon are pocket monsters, after all. These are monsters, and the movie doesn't let you forget that. And yet, despite that, they're so well integrated into the society, the human society portrayed in this movie. It's exactly how I would imagine a city which functions like the main setting of this movie, Rhyme City, to work in the Pokemon universe. And put quite frankly, the monster designs and the world design in this movie were the best thing about it. Even more so than the humor or the story, which was the weakest part, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Like, there are mentions all throughout this movie, mostly through visual references, of locations throughout the Pokemon universe, which make it clear that this is some version of the world that we see in the games and anime. But just to be clear, the world that we see in the games and the world that we see in the anime isn't the same. Even sometimes the world that we see in the games isn't the same from one game to the next. There is a Pokemon multiverse. It has been well established by the narrative of some of the remake games that have come out recently. And I know this is getting super nerdy, just stick with me for a second. But I think it's pretty clear that the universe in which this movie takes place is yet another alternate universe in that multiverse. So while it may seem Pokemon World-esque, they can do virtually limitless things with this setting, and that excites me so much, because Rhyme City as a place was so well realized. I could imagine living there myself, and I would love to see that applied to Detective Pikachu movie-esque reimaginings of actual locations that we've actually seen in the mainstream games and anime. Goldenrod City, for example, my ultimate favorite location in the entire Pokemon franchise. I'd love to see it get the Detective Pikachu live-action movie treatment. And I think that even someone who isn't familiar with the games or the anime would feel a similar way about the locations in this movie, because they were so well realized, and I think super interesting. I could imagine somebody saying, I don't know much about Pokemon, but I know there's a ton of locations in it. I wonder what they would look like on the big screen. Or, for example, Rhyme City in the movie has an interesting caveat to it. In most places in the Pokemon world, Pokemon work with humans in that the humans are their trainers, and the Pokemon battle for them in competitions. In Rhyme City is different, though. Pokemon have jobs right alongside humans. They partner with humans in their jobs instead of being partnered with humans as their Pokemon. That's an interesting dynamic, one that's unique to this setting. So I could see someone who isn't actually a fan of the Pokemon franchise wondering what the regular human Pokemon dynamic that is mentioned in this movie would look like in movie form. And then there's Pokemon battling. Pokemon battling in this movie looked pretty great. We see battles on smaller scales and battles on larger scales, and they were all pretty exciting, though that does bring me to my first real complaint about the movie. This was a detective movie, it was a mystery, so battling wasn't the focus, and there aren't really battles in Rhyme City anyway, since Pokemon battling isn't a thing there, so we weren't going to see a lot of battles in the first place. Like, I knew that the moment that I heard that about the setting. But man, after seeing the few battles that we did see, I really wanted to see more. I really wish that battling, like on the street, trainer versus trainer battling, like you see in the games, or tournament battling in big stadiums, had been more of a presence in this movie. And I certainly hope that if they do a sequel to this, that's something that we see more of. To be clear, to reiterate, what we got was cool, and it was fine for the story they were trying to tell, but it left me wanting a lot more. As did, unfortunately, the mystery of this movie. The joy of a mystery story is that, hopefully at least, you'll be able to piece together what the characters are piecing together as they piece it together, and work out what the next step in solving the mystery might be right alongside them. And while the characters are obviously piecing the solutions to this mystery together as they go, you can see it happening. It's not as if the answers that they're looking for are ever handed right to them, except in exceptional cases. But the solutions that they do come up with are very clearly derived from logic which only exists in this world. And while the world is developed exceptionally well for a single movie, it's still just a single movie. And this is a place that even die-hard Pokemon fans have never visited before, at least unless it exists in the Detective Pikachu game as well, but I haven't played that, so I wouldn't know. And even then, the logic that they had to draw upon, I would imagine, is something that you wouldn't really be all that familiar with, even if you had played a single video game. So this isn't a mystery that you can solve along with the characters, especially not if you're a general moviegoer. You can, of course, derive satisfaction from seeing these characters achieve their goals, but that's really it, and that is a bit of a bummer in a detective story. And then there's the climax of the movie, when we do finally figure out what the villain's plan is, and then we get a resolution to the main mystery of the movie. Where is main character Tim's dad, who has been missing since he was in a car accident and before the events of the movie even really started? When we finally get the answers to those questions, this is a Pokemon movie, so it's kind of over the top, crazy, and cheesy, just like the climax to any of the animated Pokemon movies might be, or the climaxes to any of the video games. We're talking like Pokemon X and Y climax levels of over-the-top craziness here. And while I loved it, I ate it all up, because I am a Pokemon fan through and through. I can imagine someone who wasn't entirely on board with this concept going into the movie finding the climax of the movie and the resolution to the main mystery to be a little too over the top and cheesy. I could see that happening. Again, I didn't think so, but I could see it happening. And even then, I don't want to spoil too much, but even then, the main climax of the movie, like the climax with defeating the villain and whatnot, depended on logic that it felt made up on the spot. We weren't really given any indication that something like this could happen before it actually did. In fact, when the villain goes to enact his plan, he has to declare to the general population of the city why it's scary, because they wouldn't know why it's scary immediately, at least not the full degree of why it's scary. Still, though, like I said, this movie takes place in a beautifully realized version of this alternate world in which these things called Pokemon believably exist alongside real people. It's kind of mesmerizing to look at. Even as a pre-existing fan, I still found the visuals in this movie to be excellent and refreshing, and I had a really hard time not just staring into the backgrounds of each scene, trying to absorb as much as I could of what was there, because there was just so much there. And I can't see how that would be different for a general moviegoer than it would be for me, aside from the fact that I would recognize more of the little details hidden in those backgrounds than they would. And as I mentioned before, the comedy is solid, just in general, is solid. So, as a general movie, I think this hits about a 6.5, maybe a 7, and it certainly works as a proof of concept that something like this can work in live action. So I do expect either more Detective Pikachu movies or more Pokemon live action movies in general to come as a result of this movie having been made. I do think that this grand experiment of a live action Pokemon movie is a success, generally speaking. But if you are one of the many living humans who have some connection to this franchise going into this movie, there's so much more for you to get out of it. There's Easter eggs everywhere. I mentioned that this is a fully realized iteration of a live-action version of this world, so of course there's going to be Easter eggs for you to pick out of the details everywhere, just by virtue of good world design. And then, of course, this is a Ryan Reynolds movie where he's playing a character who doesn't ever stop talking, so there are more meta-ish references splashed into his dialogue here and there, too, that were just great. They could have been just a tad too much, as this is not a franchise where characters typically break the fourth wall, but he never quite gets to fourth wall breaking territory. They're just references that are a little more meta than other references, and so they work quite well. So, as a movie for Pokemon fans, I'd give this a solid 7.5, maybe even an 8. It's not as good as some of the first impressions might have led you to believe. People were definitely a little hyped up coming right out of the movie, tweeting out their first impressions. It's in no way perfect, and I wouldn't even quite say that it's approaching perfect either, but it's a good, solid film that I do believe they could do some really cool things with going forward, the concept of which I feel like they could do some really cool things with going forward. And I do think it's probably not only the best, but also the most accurate video game adaptation we've ever gotten in movie form. Like, I can totally imagine the first live-action Pokemon movie being something more along the lines of a live-action Mario Brothers movie or something, but that's not what we got. We got something that feels authentic to the Pokemon universe, and which was also good. Like, I want to hammer that home. It's also a good movie in and of itself. If you're on the fence about this one, I'd definitely check it out. Like, maybe don't go see it in the theater if some of the deficiencies I talked about here do bother you, but get it on DVD. Buy it on DVD or on Blu-ray. Watch it at home when it comes out. You're not going to regret it. As per usual, though, guys, I'd like to know, what did you think of Detective Pikachu, if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below, or over in my Discord, link in the description. And hey, since this is a more specialized video than the Steven Universe and the Starverses that I usually cover, let's sneak a more specific question in there. Do you guys play the Pokemon trading card game? And if so, what strategy do you like to use best? But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you again later.